Today I'd like to talk about evolution of meta, how it changed across the years. Since we are approaching Natlan, I thought that it would be a good idea to just go over what happened in the past until the present. I will go over most played characters, themes from data from Spiral Abysses, and what elements were good, how the meta looked like when it comes to some kind of synergy and team building, and then what were the big breakpoints that separated certain nations. I will try to answer the question if power creep is big issue in Genshin or not. So with that being said, let's get into release of Genshin Impact. On release we had quite different idea of what characters are good and what are not. But it all comes down to, on release, nobody knows what they are doing. And with quite low amount of characters, there isn't much to choose from. We had like 22 characters at the end of 1.0, and with that, some were better, some worse. I was going through tier lists to see what was actually good or not, and I found out that Diluc, Chi-Chi and Venti were wonderful. Some honorable mentions would be Keqing and Jean. When it comes to 4 stars, we had Fischl, Barbara, Zhangling and Bennett. Barbara kinda surprised me because I didn't expect her to be any good, but let's be honest, she's one of the few healers and she is free. So that's a reason why she probably was so high on the list. 1.0 updates released a ton of new characters, mostly focused on main DPS or sub DPS aspects. Meanwhile, there's one exception, and that is Zhongli, who is Shielder. During 1.0 updates, there was also a rise of the big 3 4 stars, Zhangling, Xingqiu and Bennett. And these characters are staple in teams such as Chalda International. This trio is incredibly strong ever since it was found out that it is actually good. Venti and Sucrose were, alongside Kazuha, the 3 anime characters that had the big spotlight. However, during Inazuma, Venti and Sucrose use kinda fell off. What Venti and Sucrose suffered from was not being adaptable enough. Venti had his big tornado that sucked all enemies into it. However, it couldn't suck big enemies, and as the game moved forward, more larger and larger mobs were created, thus Venti is considerably weaker than at launch. Then Sucrose, she just plants her ultimate and it's just on one place, and it doesn't really have that big AoE effect. It's kinda small. Meanwhile, Kazuha does what Sucrose does, but much better. Kazuha became one of the strongest units because of the utility he provides. Thus, Sucrose could be a free-to-play pick if you don't have Kazuha, but Kazuha is still ultimately much better choice. So now let's move on 1.6 Abyss. What were the most popular teams by then? We have Ganyu Freeze, or as it was called back then, Morgana, Mona, Ganyu, Diona and Venti team. Then we had 2 versions of Child and International with Kazuha or Venti, and then we had Hu Tao, Vape/Melt. It contained Hu Tao, Xingqiu, Chongyun and Zhongli. Then we have Xiao Cryo. It included Xiao, Chongyun, Jean and Zhongli. And then Xiao Jio, which instead of Chongyun had Albedo. And those were the most popular teams. There wasn't a whole lot to go from. That's why it probably looks weird that there's just one team that has the big 3 4 stars and one team that uses Kazuha. Majority uses Zhongli instead of some kind of sustain, and Zhongli retained this popularity for a long time. Now, let's move on to 2.0. We can also see that there isn't much Electra. Nobody really played Electra, but if you look at even certain sets, such as Thunder Soother, Thundering Fury and Lava Walker Crimson Witch, you can see that there are some noticeable similarities. Pyro was always played, but Electra was kinda lacking something. It didn't have that much appeal. The only exceptions that were played during 1.0 updates really were Fischl and Keqing. With Inazuma, their became larger focus on Electro as we are going to Electro Nation. And that brings us to 2.0. In Inazuma, there was large focus on hypercarry teams and not much on reaction. Majority of characters that were meta players in 1.8 kinda fell off. The only 5-star exceptions would be those. Inazuma didn't help Electro that much. The only exception was Raiden because she did exceptional damage. And we can even see it in the Abyss. Chalda International stayed the same. Hutao changed Chongyun for Albedo. And we can see then that there was this team that consists of Pyro, Hydro, and 2 Geo, which is kinda interesting to see. Then we had Mono Geo team, Freeze Ayaka, which again was really bumping up the focus on the main DPS, and numerous Raiden teams from National through Overload to Hypercarry. Electro didn't get too many tools to work with in Inazuma, however that will change in the future. Electro got some units that became really strong in the future, and since I'm teasing it a bit too much probably, let's venture into the lands between Liyue and Natlan. Sumeru brought us a new element, and that was Dendro. With Rise of Dendro, Electro became once again popular. Electro finally got their own identity. Facial return to the power. Aggravate, Spread, Hyperbloom, Quicken, all kinds of reactions between Dendro and Electro became very popular. Especially Hyperbloom and Bloom became one of the strongest reactions. Dendro is a very interesting element because it offers for almost every single element something. It just excludes Geo and Animal. Other than that, it has everything. It has even great balance between all the characters. Sub DPSs, shielders, healers, main DPSs. So with that being said, let's take a look at main DPSs. Because main DPSs were the forefront of everything that is going on. Here we have Tighnari and Alhaitham. Tighnari became part of standard banner, so nobody could just aim for Tighnari because there was no guarantee you will get him. There was just the chance. But Alhaitham, you could guarantee him, and he became one of the most incredible main DPSs out there. Ever since he was released, he was staple in Dendro teams. He slots in there well, he is easy to use, he's a great driver for Dendro to react with other elements, and there wasn't any other option. Alhaitham became so flexible, so useful, and so strong that he created something I would say a new standard for main DPS characters, which is a pool of characters that until Fontaine didn't really have any other character added. In Sumeru we also didn't get too many characters that were outside of Dendro. One of them would be for example Nilu or Dia or Dori. There were some, but they were mostly focused to help Dendro, although Dia was just flop. So now let's take a look at 3.8 Abyss. This is the last Abyss where we can see teams from every update. Chalda International, Hutao Vape, Ayaka Freeze, then we had numerous Raiden teams, and then the new teams. Nilo Bloom, Hyperbloom Alhaitham, Quicken Alhaitham, and Quicken Tighnari, which are the 4 new teams that popped off during this era. And with that having out of the way, let's go into our latest nation, Fontaine. With Fontaine we have seen quite significant changes. First is a return of main DPS characters, in form of Nuvilat and Arlecchino. At the same time we have seen rise of niche teams, such as Navia and Lini. It is also important to mention that Fontaine had this mechanic where you had to balance your life. Some abilities used your life and others returned the life to you, which is the case for everyone I mentioned except for Navia. Then it is also important to mention that main DPSs were starting to limit 1.0 characters. I'm of course talking about the big 3 of 1.0. These 3 were unchanged and were abused by so many other teams that it was ridiculous. Now we see that some main DPS from Fontaine cannot fully utilize them, and that is Arlecchino, she cannot utilize Bennett's heal, which is like the least amount of worries you would have. But the main reason is Nuvilad. Nuvilad cannot utilize Bennett's burst because he scales off of HP, and he cannot utilize Xingqiu because he doesn't use normal attacks. But to be fair, Nuvilad is powerhouse of its own. He really doesn't need that much of a help to do a bit more damage. But on the other hand, there was a return of certain long dead characters, and that was Jean and Diluc. At the beginning of the video I didn't speak a whole lot about Jean, but she was decent healer, not amazing, but she was decent. And Diluc was big DPS. There was nobody better at the beginning of the game than Diluc. Fontaine revived those two. Jean thanks to Furina, because Furina requires big healer, otherwise her kit does literally nothing, because she buffs everybody, but reduces their HP up to 50%. And if you don't have more than that, then it does literally nothing. So you need big healer to fully heal your team. But Jean's role can be switched for another big healer such as Baiju or Charlotte. For those that had the opportunity to have Baiju, Baiju was probably the better choice because he has great healing, he has shield, and he is Dendro, which is quite significant for Hydra units such as Furina. And then we have Xianyun, who revived Diluc. Xianyun is Anemo unit, and she allowed a new type of gameplay. She allows characters to use plunge attacks, which was only usable for Shao because he had it in his kit. But Diluc could utilize plunge quite well because his plunge multiplier is the highest in the game. Because of that, it opened new opportunity for Diluc to shine. Although it isn't the best team out there, like, don't get me wrong, it still offers something to do. It isn't just his dead unit, now he has something to do, except for monopyre teams or just Hurdur damage, which was, in my opinion, quite significant. As I was talking about Alhaitham during the Sumeru segment, I touched a bit on the new power level of main DPS, what they should do. And Arlecchino with Nuvilad are another two big main DPS characters alongside Alhaitham. They all got what Alhaitham had. However, those two are exceptional, because their power level is so high that they can be played alone. And it is mostly thanks to their kit. Nuvilad has heal in her kit. When he uses his charge attack, he fully heals, then he uses his health as a tunnel for more Hydra damage. Thus, he can balance his life. Then Arlecchino, she basically can fully heal thanks to her ultimate, and she uses Bond of Life, which absorbs healing taken. But she has her passive that reduces her healing taken by 100% by other characters than Arlecchino. The thing is that those two, especially Nuvilad, are so strong that they can play solo. Just look at earliest Parlabyssis during Fontaine after Nuvilad was released. He was basically soloing one side. He didn't need anything else, he was just popping off. Meanwhile, Arlecchino, she is very good, but I wouldn't trust her on being Nuvilad good, if that makes any sense. Now, let's move on to the Abyss. During the Sumeru Abyss, I was talking about that every update had its good teams in it. This is the first one where it isn't the case, because Ayaka Freeze and Raiden teams fell off by this point. It didn't do enough damage. Raiden still could be playable in any Dendro teams that uses Electro. She's still very good, but she isn't as good as she was in the past. From 1 update we have Childa International and Hutao Vape, still going very strong. From Sumeru we have Alhaitham Hyperbloom, and that's about it. Then are the new teams, which is Nuvilad Bloom team, which includes Nuvilad, Furina, Kazuha and Baiju. And then there is Arlecchino Vape, which is very similar to what Hutao does actually. As of 4.6, Hyperbloom is still going very strong, although we have seen fall of 2.0 teams. And now to conclude this video, we have seen that old characters just fall off eventually. That wasn't the case with Hutao and Tartaglia or Childa. However, we have seen that Raiden Shogun and Ayaka fell off, and same thing happened with 1.0 units such as Chi-Chi, Diluc and so on. New characters are kinda limiting old ones or bringing them back from the grave and offer a new playstyle. Meanwhile, we can see that Hyperbloom, still one of the greatest reactions out there, but it might be only a matter of time before you learn something new. We don't know actually what mechanic will be in Natlan. We only know from Fontaine that it had something special, so I would deduce that something new will be in Natlan, but so far we cannot say that much about it at all. And with that being said, thank you for your time. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one. And don't forget to have fun. See ya.